Hi, we're going to talk about Python today, and we're going to get started by getting going with some of the basics. We're going to do that by opening the Python interpreter. So I am going to open up Terminal. If you're on a PC, then you can use CMD, the command. I'm just going to clear that to get rid of some of that junk. And all I have to do is type in Python, and if Python is properly installed, we'll see that it is running Python version 2.7.2 and give some other stuff we don't need to really worry about. And what this is a place where we can enter Python commands, and we can do some simple things. For example, we can do math. If I type in the number 5, it says, well, that just evaluates to the number 5, and so it prints out the result of that expression, which is just 5. That's not too interesting, but suppose I type in 5 plus 2. Well, that is going to evaluate the expression I typed in, 5 plus 2, which is the value 7, and it's going to return the value of that expression. We can do other kinds of math, not surprisingly. I can type in space if I want, and I can do some multiplication. 5 times 7, use the asterisk key for multiplication, and we get 35. We can do division and subtraction as we might expect. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 10 minus 2 is 8. And there are some other interesting operators too, actually quite a few, that we'll talk about in a minute. Those are numbers. Another, well, I'll say those numbers are what's called a data type. A data type is a representation of some data, and there's different ways to represent data. There are numbers, and there are strings. String is a fundamental data type in Python, and all programming languages for that matter. While numbers have all of the semantics we expect from numbers in the real world, strings are simply a sequence of characters, and we represent them by wrapping them in quotes. You can either use single or double quotes as long as you're consistent. I tend to use double quotes. So I can type in my name, Ben, and it tells me that evaluates to the string Ben. Python interpreter tends to like single quotes. Just like we can use mathematical operators to do arithmetic on numbers, there are operators on strings. Interestingly, if I say Ben plus the string Betterson, what this is going to do is not add these strings because, right, the mathematical addition operator doesn't make any sense. But what we can do is concatenate them. So the plus operator does something different depending on what the operands are. What are the things that are being provided to that plus operator? Oh. We'll get to errors in a minute, but I accidentally left off a quote. So if I put back that quote on, we'll see it just concatenates those two strings, and we get Ben Peterson. Maybe I wanted a space in between them. You'll notice I can press the up arrow key to recall the last thing I typed in, which is quite useful. You can use the arrow keys to move around. I'm on a Mac, so I use Control B and Control F, back and forward to move around. So that's also quite useful. I can concatenate 3 things. This time I'm concatenating Ben and a space in my last name, and we get the string I had intended. Okay, so this is the basics. There's something else that is quite useful, which is some of the other operations we talked about. So we looked at the 4 basic ones, but there are other more sophisticated ones. So for example, I can use an exponentiation, or take the use exponents. So if I want to square the number 4, that is 4 squared, I can use 2 asterisks together, and this says take 4 to the power of 2, and it'll give me 16. You can get big numbers quite quickly. If I do 4 to the power of 3, that's 4 times 4 times 4, or 64. 4 to the power of 4, 256, and so on. Let's look at another example. Let's say I have 52 cards, and I want to represent that I have those 52 cards in a meaningful way. What I can do is assign them to a variable. A variable is a name that represents storage in Python, and it persists, it stores that some value. In this case, I've set up the name num_cards. That's the name of a variable. And I've assigned to it the value 52. If I want to see the value of that variable, I can just type in the variable name num_cards, and like everything else we've been doing so far, it evaluates that expression, and the value of that expression, which is the value of the variable, is 52. Now I can do arithmetic on that. Suppose I want to deal those cards to 5 players, and I want to find out how many cards go to each player. Well, I can divide by 5, and what do you think I'm going to get? Well, you might think I'm going to get some kind of decimal number like 10.4, but I'm not. I'm just going to get 10, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Right, so we've done an expression that takes a thing on the left, which is a variable. It actually turns into it evaluates as the value of that variable, divided by the thing on the right. And the value of the number 5 is just 5, so it turns into 52 divided by 5, which is 10. So why do we get 10 and not 10.4? And the reason is that both num cards and 5 are a special kind of number. I told you that they are data type of number, but they are actually a data type of integer. Python has several different kinds of data types, and there are both integer numbers as well as floating point numbers. If we want to force Python to do this arithmetic using floating point numbers, what we need to do is make sure that at least one of the numbers is a floating point number. And we can do that by making this number 5.0 instead of just 5. If we do that, now we're going to be saying 52 divided by 5.0. It's an integer divided by a floating point number. And in that case, Python will convert the integer to a floating point number, do the arithmetic in floating point, and give you the result of that operation. There's one more operator I want to tell you about. And to understand this operator, let's look at this same example, number of cards. We have 52 cards, we've dealt them to 5 players. Each player got 10 cards, and there's 2 left over. How do I calculate that there's 2 left over? Well, the answer is I want to do the division and then figure out what the remainder is. The remainder is, with integer division, is you do your division, and then any value that doesn't get distributed is left over. And in Python, the remainder operator is a parenthesis. So I can say numCards parenthesis 5. And this says do a division, but instead of showing the result of the total division, it's going to give the remainder, which is 2. In Python, this is typically referred to as the modulo operator, but you can think about it as remainder, which is the same thing. All right, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is order of operations. Suppose I do an operation like this, 3 plus 5 times 2. What is the result going to be? Is it going to be 3 plus 5, which is 8, multiplied by 2, and you get the answer 16, or is it going to be 5 times 2, which is 10, and then add 3 and get 13? Well, the answer is the latter, 13, and the reason is that Python applies an order of operations, which is called precedence in programming, which is the same as you'll typically find in the math you learned in elementary school. You may be familiar with PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. And those are the order of operations in Python, just like in math. So we don't have to use parentheses, but if we want to, we can. So if we were to type in parentheses like this would have exactly the same value as the previous version without parentheses. And of course, if we want to force a different order, we can use parentheses, which have a higher order of precedence than multiplication, and so that forces that. And notice the E, parentheses comes first, but then there's exponents. So if I were to do this operation, what would I get? Think about it for a second. The answer is going to be 5 squared, which is 25 times 3, or 75. One of the nice things about this Python interpreter is that it's really easy to load and use to test any kind of Python operation. So when you're taking a quiz and you're not quite sure what something looks like, unless I tell you otherwise, feel free to open up your terminal and test something out in the Python interpreter. It's very easy to do on a Mac. If you don't know about Spotlight, you can just do Command space, type in terminal, type in Python, and you're ready to go. Okay, that's it for now.